Yeah, well, I mean, that's absolutely the heart of this. And I would say in two senses. First of all, specifically, as I was saying earlier, in relation to Jerusalem. Because unless you have some concept of parity in a city that is open for worship by not just obviously Jews and Muslims, but by Christians too, I mean, it's very hard to see how you can, I mean, there will be no resolution of this dispute without a resolution of the issue of Jerusalem. Because it is for Muslims a holy place, for Jews, of course, and you know, also for Christians. But so in respect of Jerusalem, unless you have some concept of equality or parity of religious esteem, then it's very hard to make it work. But the other thing is very specifically, actually, and partly, you know, one of the bizarre things about this situation is that if you look at this poorly drawn map, actually Israel is obviously the dominant party, right, with the dominant share of resources and the dominant amount of money. If you look at this poorly drawn map, it's actually not, obviously, okay? And therefore, one thing that's really very important in this, and where I think that this concept of reconciliation, based on an understanding that there is a proper theological justification for such reconciliation, is precisely because otherwise there is a danger that Israelis believe, well, these people can just be basically relegated. And there is a danger that these people basically believe the only answer to these people is to squash them. So, you know, I think, you know, and one of the ways this happens, incidentally, very oddly, is that, you know, the Palestinian Authority requires to get, it's about 60% of its budget now, but it's coming down, in fact, because of the Palestinians doing quite a good job now under the Prime Minister Fayyad governing. 6% of the budget comes from foreign aid. But guess who the two biggest funders of the Palestinians? You'd think it would be from here. But actually, it's Europe and America are the two biggest funders. Right. Now, in fact, and I often say this to the Arab countries, if you take a country like Saudi, it's got the resource to make a huge difference to the Palestinian GDP, but actually it's very hard to get, for the moment, the Saudis to fund the Palestinian Authority, because they believe that in funding it, they're in a sense accepting the status quo, which is, you know, which they argue is unjust. But if you actually look at how you resolve this thing overall, it can only ever be resolved on the basis that this, you know, Arab world of several hundred million, except that this state of whatever it is, 7, I guess, yeah, right about, has a right to exist, and this state, 7, accepts that these are going to be treated equally. And without a basis of doing that that's about values and not just self-interest or territorial negotiation, you've got a problem. And that's why, you know, because then what some people here think is, look, we can just basically carry on sitting on them and we'll have the support of various allies and so on in doing that. And then these people say, well, look, we've got no option but to just we accept the fact that we're at war. So this reconciliation won't happen unless it's grounded in a concept of values and not just interests, and possibly even more specifically, in a concept of faith that gets you beyond the power relationships to a partnership and a parity of esteem that is based actually on something that is as much spiritual and religious as it is political or practical.